on the canvas. So I'm playing off of stuff that's happening. It's not a real profound thing, it's not, but it's sort of been based on, you know, art that I love, art that I like, but it's also sort of like, you know, trying to be playful, inventive. You see, that's a lousy line. So I'm really conscious of drawing. I'm conscious of proportions. I'm conscious of rhythms. I'm conscious of all this. So a line like that is stupid. It's like sloppy. You know, it doesn't fit into the kind of structure of these lines as they exist now. You know,
What was your initial idea before you started?
What's that?
What was in your mind before you started? I mean,
Cubist grid.
okay. What is that? I know a cubist. I've seen cubist paintings before.
It's an expression referring to the type of visualization that an analytic cubist would use in regard to structuring the canvas regarding form. Is that clear?
As clear as it's going to be right now.
When Picasso paints you know, analytic cubism, you know what that looks like, right?
Yes.
Okay. There is a sense of there's an invisible grid that seems to have been projected onto the canvas by the artist before he begins.
Okay.
And that grid is actually giving him sort of cues as to how the form will be aligned with the surface of the canvas.
Perspective.
It's not really perspective, but it's breaking perspective. It's a redistribution of form across the surface of the canvas. You know, and in order for it to hold together as a composition, there has to be some kind of regularity to it, and that means that there is an invisible, in a sense, grid of sorts that is helping the artist construct the shards of information that will activate the canvas in a particular way. So in a sense, I'm doing that. In a sense, why did you disturb me? In a sense, I'm doing that. Now, I don't really mind that things happen like this because it is a bit like Da Vinci's seeing a landscape in the stains on a wall. You know, not that I'm looking for a landscape or figures, but I want to be able to play off of the, you know, the, not randomness so much, but the, I guess the excitement of just plain marks on a page, right?
Is the cubist grid like rigid and symmetrical, or is it kind of asymmetrical?
It's really, it's called a grid, but it's really not. It's like almost, it's not a Cartesian grid of any kind, and it's not regular. It is simply like the template. There's a kind of abstract template that, you know, it's really not, it's not a one-to-one correspondence with the grid.
It's not like this.
No, not at all. It could be like I mean, if you think of a grid in terms of space bent by gravity, right? How the grid is constructed on a flexible shape of space, bent, right? It's not like that. The space is bent by the artist's mind, and the grid conforms to the mind of the artist bent. I mean, it's really an expression. It doesn't mean it's not to be taken so literally.
So, but you're still working with constraints of vertical and horizontal, but you're going around like spherically?
Yeah, I'm just arranging marks on the canvas. I'm, you know, obviously taking certain areas and strengthening them. Maybe it'll be clearer once I start what I'm doing next.
So you're creating the structure in order to fill in the forms of the word.
Yeah, I'm going to eventually. I want to see all of this as form.
Yeah.
You know, with divots and creases and things like that. And I want to start laying the opacity of the white on here. I'm start laying that on after this, dries.
So it's just provocative composition right now.
Yeah, well, you want it, you want to have a kind of, something interesting to you.
Yeah.
Something, I don't know how to describe it, but I know that in my mind there's de Kooning, always de Kooning. There's Picasso.
In your mind, de Kooning, in your pocket, do you have the keys?
I have Delacroix.
I'd rather get a Delacroix.
She actually wants the keys.
Keep it out.
I was really thinking it was metaphorical.
I'd rather have a Delacroix in my hands, actually. And if I sold it, I could get many more.
Keep it out of fifth gear. Delacroix fucked that up.
Here, I thought you were talking about the skill in your pocket kind of idea.
Hey, that's my wife you're talking about. Is that skill in your pocket? Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
Yes, there are.
I can't see that.
That's Comey.
That's you.
Remember Comey?
What's that?
When Comey was testifying. Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
Yeah, right.
That's gotta be one of the greatest expressions of modern time.
Do you think in terms of primary, secondary kind of parts of composition, or it just doesn't really matter at this point?
No, of course, everything matters. It matters as much as any composition in the world. When you paint, you do spend time painting like this, and
Yeah.
you realize that the whole essence of a lot of the abstract expressionist painters that I love is that there's an all-over effect.
Mhm.
That every corner of the canvas is important,
Mhm.
right? And once you realize that in abstraction, you see it beyond a doubt in any other painting that's ever been done. You see that the artist looks, his or she is focusing your eye on a composition in the center, but in reality they're laboring over the other parts so that your eye goes where they want it to go. And sometimes if the composition, the essence of the composition, the most important aspect of the narrative part of the composition, is present on the page, the artist will actually emphasize something else so that your eye does not focus on the essential part. This is a Baroque kind of conceit where you illuminate something that is secondary. And then in the shadows you find the thing that is the most important part of the narrative. Have you ever seen that? It's stunning when you see it. I think Orazio Gentileschi did it, Artemisia I think did it. I don't think Caravaggio really did it, but other people played with that kind of. Guercino does it in his early work. It's a sort of way of really, it's like Hitchcock. It's kind of mysterious. It's like you're looking at the painting and you see like a tree or an angel or something like that, and then darkness, and then you look into the darkness and you see, oh my God, that's the subject of the painting. It sort of suspends your realization of the subject until you see it. And it's done with light because they knew how to manipulate light. You see, when Caravaggio began using light that way, and nobody else really had, I'm going to let that dry, okay, for a second. When he started using light that way, the thing that happened with it is that he realized how to heighten the illumination of a picture from light coming from darkness in such a convincing and palpable way that the form looks like you could almost touch it with your hands. And nobody had ever really done that. With Michelangelo, it was sculpture that, in his sculptures obviously you can, but even in his paintings, you can't grasp these figures. They're kind of flat and overly colored, and they're not really like the same thing. They're not existing in a space. You see, Baroque painting is predicated upon a continuity of space, our space to the space of the painting. That's really one of the essential features of the Baroque. That you're not looking at a window, and through the window you see the composition, right? That's spectatorial. In Baroque painting, the composition is spilling into your space. There's a kind of parity between your space and the space of the painting. Okay, you understand? That's why, like in Bernini's Saint Teresa in Ecstasy, you know that painting, that sculpture, right? He made, on the side he made, the sculptures here and on the wall of the church inside, he sculpted a bunch of men like leaning over a balcony watching this. I mean, really a joke. If you've ever read Teresa's account of this thing, what's it called when you have a vision, right? It is really sexual. I mean, it's like it's not like you just, it's Freudian, the arrows must be penises, it's an ecstasy. It's literally, when you read it, you feel the sexuality of this event. So it's very strange. That's why she had to consult with her priests and say, is the devil telling me this, or is this divine? She was really troubled by that. Yeah, but anyway, aside from that, he takes the composition out of the composition. So these guys are in our space. The sculpture's over there. They're watching it. We're watching it. It's all the same space. Okay. How does Caravaggio do this? In the darkness of a church. And, obviously looked around and thought, these are great paintings, but they're really dark in the church, right? What would be the key element of creating a figure in this church that looks like it's actually in the church's space, right? You have to build the illumination in a particular way. And the way the illumination is built is through opacity versus transparency. That the opacity floats on top of the transparency. It thins at the turnings of the transparency to become optical gray. But in the highest peaks of the light, it is purely opaque, right? And it started not by using color directly, but by using light, heightening with light, but doing it in a severe way, according to the tenets of that model of illumination that I showed you, okay? You understanding what I'm saying? Now here's the curious thing. When light hits a canvas, has a lot of glazing on it, right? Okay? It has to pass through the glazes to get to any piece of light that it can reflect back at, right? So there's a certain amount of time required for the light to pass through the glazes and then to re-emerge from the canvas, right? On the opacity, it's a much faster return. So you've got simultaneously this happening, and this is the essence of it, is that the light moves through the glazes and comes back at you. The light smacks the opacity and comes back at you like that. You see what I'm saying? You've got this rapid return of light from the opacity and a slower return. And as much as I hate to say this, this is why those black velvet paintings work so well. You know black velvet paintings, you're like 3 miles down the road, and you're coming up to the gas station, and you see Elvis and the Pope and Jesus and all that, and they're like, whoa, I can see your faces from here. You know, why? Because the velvet absorbs the light, the black, and so any return from that is negligible, and just maybe a bit. The gesso that they use to paint the white on it is so opaque that it slams the light back fast. So the combination of the absorbent black and the highly reflected light creates a stunning, albeit cheesy, effect. Unfortunately, this is precisely what is happening with Rembrandt and Caravaggio. It's the play of opacity against transparency. Opacity, translucency, transparency. The careful manipulation. And as if to make that point clearer, when they analyzed the lightest lights on Caravaggio, they found that he was using a mixed tempera at the very top surfaces of it. Now, if you compare tempera to oil painting, tempera is much more opaque, right? So to even push those lights even further, to have them bounce back even faster, knowing that oil paint, and of course they're using white lead, so if you've ever used white lead, it's it's kind of transparent. I don't like white lead, I never use it, because, what's his name, Max Stirner said that one of the greatest inventions of modern painting is titanium. It's better than what they had, and if they had titanium back then, they would have used that instead of lead. Because the lead is too granular and it's too transparent, but to get the full opacity that was needed in, especially in the Baroque, titanium would be the one, okay? But they found like a tempera, a mixed tempera in the latest lights. So that is precisely what triggered my whole idea regarding the Baroque light being an analog to linear perspective. Because it again creates a corridor between the eye and the divine, or the eye and infinity. You see what I'm saying? If light is traveling at infinite rate of speed, hitting the painting, bouncing into your eye at the instant of reflection, that's a corridor to the infinite. Just like the vanishing point in perspective is a corridor to the infinite. And it's a resurgence of that kind of organization after Mannerism, which sort of did away with that kind of organization. Okay, kind of symbolized, created a symbolic effect of that organization, but not the actual visual effect. Okay? So these things are in the minds of artists from the get-go. These things that occupy modernist mind. When I talk about this stuff, you shouldn't be thinking in your mind, 15th century, early 16th century, kind of old stuff. But what does it have to do with me? These are the ideas that are floating around modernism all the time. They're floating in our times right now. Not the idea of God, obviously. I mean, well, for some people, I mean to be insulting, but it's not really about that religious thing. But in effect, I think that the painters. Have you ever seen The Seventh Seal by Bergman? An amazing movie. God, you gotta see this movie. It's so great. There's a guy. There's a knight, and he's trying to cheat death. But it's also about spirituality and redemption and stuff like that. Really powerful, allegory, this thing, and very artificial. But it's this knight in the Middle Ages, and he's got a squire. And the squire, the knight is very noble and disturbed, and he's the one playing chess with death and all of this stuff. And the squire is just sort of like, right, okay. It's a real, cynical kind of character. Really the kind of character that lets you into the film, because the film would be otherwise very stale and kind of austere and unapproachable. But because the squire's character is sort of like you can relate to and understand, you enter the whole narrative through him. There's a certain point where he separates from the knight. The knight is troubling about something, and he goes into a church, and there's a painter in the church. And the painter's working on the painting of hell. And he goes, is that how you see it? They have this conversation. And the painter is a real wise ass. This is what I love so much. The painter is a wise ass. He's painting all this stuff. He doesn't give a shit whether it's real or not. He's just playing with it. He knows more than the church. I mean, he's a typical painter. Very smart, very clever, very irreverent, and they become fast friends for a brief time while they're there, and at the end of the night comes to find them, they're drinking and laughing and talking about, in an irreverent way about this whole mystery that's life. But that the painters were like that. The painters were not. There were some that were pious. Michelangelo was not really pious. He was deeply troubled religiously. He was a massive. Religion for him was a very powerful. And because of his genius, he grapples with the way a saint grapples with religion, with faith. He's grappling with it in a way that sort of constantly in torment about the possible damnation of his soul. You know this about Michelangelo, because of his homosexuality. And also because of his involvement with classical art. Because, Savarin, why am I going like this? I'm waiting for that. Right, since I'm waiting, Savonarola, you know Savonarola? Savonarola, right? Savonarola was the fanatical monk in the late 15th century who encouraged a revolution in Florence against all of the humanists, all of the enlightened people. He encouraged everybody to throw all of their paintings and books and sculptures into a bonfire. That's called the Bonfire of the Vanities. That's what it's called. That's the title of that book, Bonfire of the Vanities. It's Savonarola's take all these masterpieces that you're working on at the moment, and because they're classically influenced, burn them all, destroy them all. These are not what God wants you to do. It's a fanatical, this is fanatic. And Botticelli actually began following him, burned a lot of his work. Michelangelo also would hear that, and it terrified him. Michelangelo being maybe the most powerful proponent of humanism at the time, and one of the most. It terrified him, and for all his life, Savonarola was a terror to him. Okay? Savonarola, of course, was, eventually the Medici caught him and they burned him there's a circle in the Piazza.
It's by the old palace.
Yeah, by the Uffizi and the Palazzo Vecchio. There's a circle on the floor that says, here is where Savonarola was burned with his, so they built this thing and they burned him with two of his compatriots. But in the Sistine Chapel, in the Last Judgment, Michelangelo was there, and he paints Saint Bartholomew, who was, of course, skinned to death. That's how Saint Bartholomew was. He went out to India to smash the sculptures, and they caught him, and they skinned him. The Indians, the Native Americans, Indians skinned him. So Michelangelo paints Saint Bartholomew in the Last Judgment. And of course, famously, he's holding what? The skin of Michelangelo. Michelangelo's self-portrait on it. And he's looking back at God with the knife in his hand. He says, should I drop him? Should I drop him into hell? Like this. Michelangelo, for the face of St. Bartholomew, painted Aretino. No, Aretino, right. Aretino was this asshole, first-class dick, but the progenitor of all the critics and gallerists that the marketeers are. He was the progenitor to them. He would make friends with the artists and also consort with kings and dukes, and he would be like a liaison between artists and dukes. If the artist would give him paintings, he would introduce them to the duke. If the artist did not give him paintings, he wouldn't introduce them to the duke. He would ignore him. But he would take the paintings and he would sell them. And he made his money by trading the paintings that were given to him. He also made his living writing as a humanist, but he also made his living writing this pornographic book that was illustrated by Marcantonio Raimondi, the guy who did that etching, that engraving of the Raphael tapestry that the Manet is based on. The Déjeuner sur l'herbe was based on that. I showed you last night that Marcantonio Raimondi did that, but Marcantonio Raimondi actually did the illustrations for this thing. So Aretino was kind of a scumbag. There's a famous portrait by Titian of Aretino. Anyway, Aretino asked Michelangelo for drawings, but later he asked Tintoretto for a painting. He would never support Tintoretto, but he supported Titian all the time. Tintoretto, said, why didn't you ever support me? He said, well, you don't ever give me anything. So Tintoretto then invited him to the studio, and he said, sit down, Pietro Aretino, sit down. And Pietro sat down thinking, well, finally, I'm going to get my Tintoretto, and Tintoretto went into the drawer and pulled out a revolver, put it next to Aretino's head. And Aretino said, Giacomo, what are you doing? And he said, oh, don't worry, I'm just trying to get the measurement of your head. Right? Aretino wrote a letter to Michelangelo advising him on what to include in the Sistine Chapel. Of course, haven't you heard that? The critic telling the artist, I really think, you imagine Jerry Schultz saying, I think the artists, let me give you some advice. Who the fuck are you to give me advice? There's a truck driver and he became a critic. Fuck you. I'm sorry, my language is terrible. I'm really angry at these people. But, so Aretino did the same thing to Michelangelo. I think you should include this and that and this and that. And Michelangelo ignored him. Of course, his trash is telling you what to do, and he's Michelangelo. He ignored him completely. Aretino got pissed off. And also, Michelangelo would never give him a drawing or anything like that. So what did Aretino do? He wrote a famous letter to Michelangelo, threatening to out Michelangelo as a homosexual. Now, people might have known he was a homosexual, but they weren't going to make a big deal of it, right? But he threatened to make a big deal of it. He threatened Michelangelo in that way. That, in and of itself, is enough to condemn this guy to hell, because, you know, why would you do something like that? It's like so bad. It's like Donald Trumpian kind of bad, you know? And Michelangelo ignored him, completely ignored him. But he put his face on Bartholomew holding Michelangelo's skin over hell. Now you understand who's got Michelangelo over hell. It's Aretino, right? But interestingly enough, too, in the lower left corner of the Last Judgment, there's a little guy going like this, looking. He's coming out on an angle this way and looking out. It's Savonarola. And Savonarola is actually positioned so that he's staring at the papal throne. You know what I mean? So the papal throne is always here. The altar's here, the Last Judgment's here, papal throne is here, right? And Savonarola is painted in the Last Judgment looking at the papal throne. You know? It's very cool. It's very, there's so much amazing stuff going on in Michelangelo, you know? But the idea of, you know, giving palpable form to these kinds of things is really kind of central to Western art. In fact, it's kind of the exact opposite of anything that we think of like in Judaic culture or in Arabic culture, the graven image, that you do not depict this stuff. You can't depict it. It's too sacred to depict it. You could never understand it. There's no way a symbol could ever approach it. And so, but the Catholics, God bless them, you know, said we can do this. But they could do it because they understood perspective and reason, and that reason was a human faculty, and that it was faculty given by God, and that because it was given only to men and women, that it was actually a sort of divine attribute, and therefore that reason could be used to actually create something in a reasonable sense, not a slippery, accidental color sense, but in a formal sense, that would actually be something akin to what God is. It's a celebration of humanity, of the dignity of man as and a gift from God, the reason to be able to actually see perspective and to actually find its way back through reason, actually, up to a certain point, right? It's reason up to a certain point, and then it starts to fall apart. And at that point, you're as close as you can get, okay? So form, then, whenever de Kooning paints, you know excavation by de Kooning? All right, it's white, like that. You know Picasso's blue period or the rose period? It's all tonal. You know, Cubism is all tonal. After Cubism, he starts doing these neoclassical things, you know, as if to say, see, I was always an Ang guy, you know? He thought I was like different, but he's about form, so he's doing that. But Caravaggio, Rubens, Rembrandt, Velasquez, Zurbarán, I mean, so many people, they emphasize form. They do it through this method of heightening with light, building light masses against other light masses, and hierarchicalizing light in the painting. So you have a hierarchy of lights, and that's what creates space in the painting. Like in you know, I mean, you know this stuff is true because other examples are, who's the famous Dutch Caravaggisti? Van Honthorst and Terbruggen. They were the people who taught Rembrandt, essentially. Rembrandt followed them. They were the Dutch Caravaggistas. So Caravaggio's model went up to Holland, right? And eventually it was picked up by another one of the greatest painters, Rembrandt, who used these kinds of methods. And these methods were clearly flying in the face of linear perspective. It's like, and so what does Rembrandt do? Which I think is phenomenal, is that when he paints the Night Watch, now in Rembrandt's studio we know that there were folios of Raphael's work. You know, so he was very well aware of Raphael. He would have been aware of the School of Athens, right? The painting by Raphael that I showed yesterday, the school with Plato and Aristotle and all the philosophers going back, which is a masterpiece of one-point perspective, okay? So Rembrandt's got this big commission to do this painting of all these people, and in his mind is Raphael's School of Athens. But he's not going to use Raphael's one-point perspective. He's going to use Caravaggio's organization of the late Mass in order to create space, right? So how do I know that he's, I mean, I don't really know that he's doing this, but look, he's got two guys in the front. One guy is holding a glove, and the glove is going like this. You know that? You know that in that painting, in the Night Watch. Well, Plato was going like this in the School of Athens. So there's no reason on earth why this guy would be holding a glove like that in the middle of the painting. It's almost like a joke. But it's because he's trying to imitate in a snide way, because Rembrandt had a kind of sense of humor, you know, the Plato in the School of Athens. And the other guy's got a lance that comes out like this. So you've got an empty glove pointing to the sky, and you've got a lance, like a military thing, pointing out to, like Aristotle. But to make matters worse, the guy who's holding the glove has his hand like this, and it's casting a shadow on the crotch of the guy holding the thing. Look at it. So you tell me, and I brought this up to an art historian once, you know, and some of these art historians are assholes. He goes, oh, you would think that as a painter. Now they denigrate you as a painter. It's only painting, it's not philosophy. It's not that they denigrate painting. You know this? You ever talk to these people, to critics? You know, they are, oh, what are you? Oh, I'm a painter. Oh, you're a painter? We don't deal with painters. They denigrate you. There are too many of you. You're a pain in the ass. Even Donald Cuthbert said, he had a friend who said, I like my painters dead. My painting's alive and my painter's dead. Meaning, painters are a pain in the ass. You know? You know why we're a pain in the ass? We're a pain in the ass because we really think differently, and we are the vessels through which this information is presented to Earth. I don't mean in a spiritual sense. I said just our minds work in a way that we spend all of our time contemplating these kinds of things. So it's only going to come out of us. The visual thought is only going to be the fruit of our experience, not of some writer who tries to understand visual experience from the outside. There are things that can only be accessed from inside the studio. They can only be accessed in the process, in the sort of trance-like process of making a painting. You encounter things that are inaccessible to anyone outside of that process. In a way they can be gleaned, or they're intelligible to a certain extent, but the full-blown experience of these things cannot happen unless you're totally engaged in this process. And the process is best enlivened, activated by painting, not by conceptual art, not by film, not by video, not by anything else, but painting, because of the immediacy of the medium, because of the connection, direct connection between the mind, the hand, the heart, the thought, the intellect, the skill, the failure, the success, the shortcomings, the incredible talent. All of the things that make up a human being are demonstrated in the very, very intimacy of painting, right? And it's the best way to access this stuff. The best way. You don't have to deal with a film crew and compromise. You don't have to have someone fabricate it for you so it's all out of your head and not out of your hands. You know? Painting. How you doing? Nice to see you there.
Yeah.
So, can we talk? All right.
So, does Delacroix's light model make a statement then about the Caravaggio's Ineffable One? Is there a statement in that?
Yeah. I think that the idea of the Ineffable One was falling by the wayside rather quickly. What was not falling by the way, because you talk about the Enlightenment and the French philosophers and stuff like that, they're not really engaged with God as much as they're engaged with the world and the Enlightenment and machines and that kind of thing. You remember when Pope said, presume not God to scan the proper study of mankind as man? You know, so really their focus was on man. like it was in the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, that was happening during a Catholic, a highly Christian Catholic sort of society where they're imbued with the sense of God to begin with. So when these things emerge in their minds, they're naturally going to fold them into an idea of religion and God. But later down the road in history, the God, Occam's razor, just slices off the God part of it, and they focus really on the empiricism of and dignity of the eye, that the eye can actually look at these things and sort of make a claim. So that's where you see an empiricism. In the Enlightenment, Delacroix is sort of a character after the Enlightenment.
Around what year was he writing that in his journal?
He was writing that in 1852, May 5th. How do you like that?
At 8 o'clock.
No, 8:30. So actually he had breakfast and then 8:30.
So that's when Nietzsche started to write about the fall of the Catholicism and the rise of
No,
Medievalism.
Nietzsche's writing at the end of the 19th century. Delacroix is living basically in the middle of the 19th century. Nietzsche is later. Right. So what here, a way of looking at it is that, and you can see it through music too, is that you have in the Age of Enlightenment, you have music that functions like a clockwork orange. Clockwork orange is the orange that works like a clock, a natural thing that works like a clock, mathematical. So you listen for examples of that. You can hear it in Mozart. Of course, it's an insult to the sublime genius of Mozart to simply put him in these terms, because there's no way. But the rigidity of some of the timekeeping and sort of musical argument, the type of argument that's presented in the sonata form, Haydn is a good example. I think Haydn invents the sonata form. The sonata form is based on argument. It's based on a discourse. It's one theme presented in one key, then it goes, then a secondary theme is presented in a different key, and then there's just they duke it out, and then there's a resolution of it back in the primary key. So it's sort of an argument. Sonata form is an argument, and it was invented during the Age of Enlightenment. Very clear argument. A, B, that. Very clear, very spectatorial. You can watch this, you read in this, it's all really cool. And the music sort of sounds like that. It has that sort of, which I think is phenomenal, this sort of faith in, order and reason and all these things. And when you push it out of reason, you stay within reason, but you push it out and observe it going out of reason and coming back. And you hear it in Mozart, in the Requiem, and when the Mozart's chords start and chord development starts getting a little bit much like Beethoven, but it's not quite. He pulls it right back into this sort of rational frame of mind. And Haydn, who's a supreme genius too, as well. You just listen
Tension
to
and release kind of idea.
What? Well, that's how modernists would put it, tension and release. But it really is very technical in regard to chords, in terms of keys, the key structures, and modulation of keys. It's in music, it's really technical. It's not like modern dance is compression, that kind of thing. It's the simplest kind of thing, but it's much more than that, right? So you have these guys working, okay? And this is the time of the Age of Enlightenment. It's the 1700s, and Benjamin Franklin's going to France and learning about the Enlightenment, and Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence, where he writes, we believe we believe these truths to be divinely ordained. He writes in the Declaration of Independence, and Benjamin Franklin comes back from France and no. We believe these truths to be self-evident. Take God out of it. Separation of church and state, but take God out of the. It's a very important moment when Benjamin Franklin says this to Thomas Jefferson, because he had been to France. He knows what the Enlightenment is. He's bringing these Enlightenment ideas back to America. Benjamin Franklin was an amazing guy, really. So anyway, you've got this all going on. Then you have this little boy who's born, he plays for Mozart, and Mozart listens to him and says, this guy will make a very big sound in the world one day. And it's Beethoven, a little boy. And Beethoven starts his career as a musician, following suit with Haydn, his teacher, and being rather, classical, certainly classical in his early works, you know. Gradually getting a little more radical, a little more wild in his music, experimental, pushing the envelope. He's like almost the quintessence of the radical experimental artist, is Beethoven. There's a tremendous similarity, I think, to Michelangelo in this regard, starting out in a kind of measured kind of form, and then suddenly overcome by doubt and guilt and all the other things, developing into this modern mannerist, is just phenomenal. Beethoven, same thing's happening. You know, by the time of the Third Symphony, he's starting to go deaf, and he's terrified, as I said yesterday, terrified that he's going deaf. It's like he can't believe that that's just happening to him. So he starts composing his music without being able to even hear what he's doing, all in his head. You think about that when I tell you to draw the model from memory. This is what is in my mind from the time I was a kid. If Beethoven can compose the Ninth Symphony totally deaf, then why can't I draw the model without looking at the model? It makes you feel really stupid. And are you supposed to say like, well, he was a genius, and I'm just like, you know, nah, whatever it is, go to Quiznos and get some guac. No. No, you don't say that. You say, I will do it. I'll figure it out. I am going to be Beethoven. I hate to say this. I know this sounds arrogant and stupid to you, but this is the voice of a 12-year-old boy. When I was 12, I was saying, I am going to be Michelangelo. I'm going to be it. I'm going to be in league with Beethoven. I'm going to be there at the dinner table with them when I die. I swear to God, when I was 12, I was saying this to myself, right? And when you're in high school, they say you're an egotist. Yeah, my ego was growing. It was growing, but it was only growing because I knew the battle was going to be great. I knew I had so much to learn. I knew that I could never do it. I probably would fail. And the warrior with his foe in sight doth grow weary with battle, though he never fight. And that's where I was. I was terrified, you know, that I was not going to make the grade, that I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. And I still am terrified. I'm terrified every day that I'm not going to be able to pull it off. Why do I want to pull it off? Why would someone say, why do you want to pull it off? What's the big deal? I mean, nobody cares, nobody knows, but I think that if I care so much about it, there must be something really important about it, you know? That's why I feel like I have to do it. And that's why I want to encourage you to just do it. You work overtime to do it. If this is what you want to make your life, if it's something that you're learning to augment your life, to improve, you know, that's beautiful. I can't think of a better thing to do. Spend your time to study these things, to enliven your mind. But if it is your life and there's no other choice, right? Then you've got to give it your all. You've got to give it your all. And realize that the complexities that are inherent in this discipline are massive. And that the intellectual, weight of it is massive, right? Okay? So you get this Beethoven, he starts going deaf, and he's writing the Third Symphony, and the music starts getting strange. The music starts getting, not because he's going deaf, but because he's actually a titan, as they said, wrestling with the gods. He is like this proto-romantic character who's sort of creating this image of the sublime, the unknowable terribilità of the universe that is there and seems to be threatening, but never actually threatens. Right? It's there, it's this massive thing. Same thing as Michelangelo. Michelangelo's terribilità, they called it. It's sort of replay. So the beginning of modernism is like the beginning of mannerism. You see, mannerism is a proto-modern event in the minds of the Western world. You understand what I'm saying when I say that? Okay, I know. It's okay. Let's say the world is divided into two parts. And if you want to really simplify it, you could say that when the Italians invented the idea of color versus drawing, it's all there. Color, drawing is mechanical, stable, right? Mozart, Haydn, Clockwork Orange. That's drawing. right? It comes from perspective, which is Clockwork Orange. The world, perspective essentially is you can see the world as numbers. You can see the world as mathematics. When you look at the world mathematically, you're engaging in perspective. And that's why Galileo was also teaching perspective, and Galileo was a scientist, and he said that the mind of God is mathematics. Mathematics, perspective is seeing the world through a mathematical paradigm. Okay? There's an opposite to that, that says, wait a minute, it doesn't work that easily. Sometimes it does, and the fruits of it are phenomenal. Like all scientific evolution, development comes from that beginning, the scientific method of Galileo. It all begins there. You know, but there's another side of it that is intuitive and that doesn't rely on the mathematics and doesn't require that kind of proof, but there's an innate proof inside of the person. And that's more akin to color, right? Drawing versus color. Now these two polarities seem to keep playing themselves out in the history of Western art. And we see it again and again. We see it again really raging its ugly head in the debate between Ingres and Delacroix. And Ingres says it's drawing, not color, and Delacroix says, you know what, I'm gonna deconstruct your ass. And he, changes the whole format of the thing, right? Because he believes, like the Romantics, that the Age of Enlightenment and the idea that science is prevalent over everything is not telling the whole story. What's evidence of that? Well, I mentioned Goya, starting out as a man of the Enlightenment, and then watching the French decimate Madrid, and then he sort of falls into this sort of stupor of nightmare, totally disheartened by the heroes, by crestfallen because the heroes of his youth are now we realize that they're just humans and they're subject to the same folly and ridiculous, and reason is a very difficult thing to hold on to, and so it slips away really quickly, like is happening globally right now with the rise of the ultra-right wing. It's frightening, and if you're not afraid of that right now, you should be very afraid of that right now. It's really proto-Hitler, Mussolini, Franco shit, isn't it? It really is. Anyone who's actually experienced that kind of world totalitarianism recognizes, right? You recognize it. So,
Color and drawing.
right. So not only do you have that, the other example is William Blake. You know William Blake? William Blake, the poet, the great poet. He's actually the father of the graphic novel in a way. He made drawings and he wrote poems underneath them, and he published these things as drawings and painted drawings and poetry, right? And when he writes in Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, that poem, Tiger, at a certain point he goes, what power, who could possibly frame this fearful symmetry? And he did not like Newton. They didn't like Sir Isaac Newton. He didn't like him. The painters were afraid of Newton because Newton showed that the light from the sun could be broken into the colors of the rainbow. And when they saw that, they freaked out. They said, "You're taking color, and you're going to demystify color. Color is our avenue toward the spirit, and you're demystifying it in scientific terms." So, what's his name? Blake did not like Newton. He thought Newton was just some guy figuring out the world with a compass, or with a rather than through the sort of divine mediation or this mystical thing that Blake was involved with. So the Romantic rebellion against the Enlightenment was just that. The Enlightenment is not going to do it. There's something else. Frankenstein, written by the 17-year-old wife of Shelley, the great poet, the great Romantic poet. She wrote this. What's it about? This guy's just a man of science. He's so bright. He's using all of the most advanced science to invent a man, to create a man. He creates a man. But what he can't create in this man is a soul. And so the monster is the monster. And he fails, Frankenstein fails, because though he was able to actually mechanically create this man, he could not imbue him with a soul, with a sense of guilt, with a sense of, even with reason. Even reason was there, but no soul was there, right? So the failures of science to answer these questions troubled the Romantics, and so they began to. For the Enlightenment form was still that kind of clockwork orange, right? When Delacroix deconstructs it, he's saying, it's not all that easy. Color is really what's running the show here, and let's show that. And when you do that, the ultra-subjective is born, the objective, the subjective. So that's what I mean when I say there's two tendencies, to objectify the world and to see the world as a subjective thing, you know, are very, like the mind-body separation, you know, that kind of thing. It's not separated, you know? But that still continues to play out after Romanticism, you know, with the, you know, when Cezanne goes back to it. It goes on today. I'll show you in the lecture, there are two pieces I end the lecture with. One is by James Turrell. Do you know James Turrell? The light and color guy, really genius guy. And the other one is by Michelangelo Pistoletto. Do you know who he is? He's an Italian arte povera sculptor. And I put the two things next to each other. They're really cool. The Turrell is, of course, just a light screen, and it's color, and it's made with light and scrims and things like that. And you see this, and it's like they're remarkable, you know, color experiences, right? The Michelangelo Pistoletto is, I love this sculpture, is he took 6 mirrors, and he faced them in toward each other and bungee corded them around like that. So this box is of mirrors, but you can only see the outside of the back of the mirror. The mirror inside of the box is doing that barbershop effect where it's like forever, you know, reflecting forever in every direction like that. Essentially, it's a closed set of infinity. It's brilliant. So simple, but so brilliant. It's like taking infinity and putting it in a box. So there you have the example of the rational mind, contemplating infinity in a rational way. And there you have the colorist, who is actually just experiencing. It's very experiential, not spectatorial. This is spectatorial. We see the box. We identify the box. We circumscribe the box. So we've circumscribed infinity. The color is something that we're totally into the experience of. So these things are playing themselves out all the time in Western thinking, right? In Western thinking especially, all right? So when we now start thinking of abstract painting, do you think, after talking about all this stuff in this way, that abstract painting is any bit different than what's going on in the whole history of Western painting? No, they're doing the same thing, it's just creating it in different terms. The same issues over and over and over again in different terms for new generations who have to encounter it in a fresh way.
But it seems they're also doing a lot of deconstruction, right? Like maybe.
What's deconstruction? What is deconstruction?
Well, like even just the idea of taking line and color apart and focusing more so on one versus the other.
Yeah, but in order to do, they're not all deconstructing. They're all. I mean, the thing is, there's deconstruction happening, but deconstruction is really recognizing within an argument, for example, the argument of the primacy of form over color, that's a lie. That's not really true. Then you deconstruct it. You recognize the binary opposition that is the falseness at the beginning of the argument. So when you say deconstruction, they're not taking it apart necessarily. What they're doing is taking an argument. Like you could take an argument like the argument for conceptual art. And conceptual art was based in the beginning on a non-material, presentation of art. It flew in the face of the commodification of art, and it was a rebellious act by Kossuth and people like that against the fetishization of art as kind of market chip. You know, they say, well, I will make art that you'll just engage your mind, but you'll never be able to own it because it'll be nothing. There's nothing there to own. You know, so you get it was really in the 60s, and it was a really potent and important movement against the art market, which was becoming massive in 1960 and afterwards, just growing. You have artists from all over the world, performance artists like the Actionists in Vienna, and doing things that you couldn't sell. They were performances, you know, they were works of art. You didn't buy tickets to these performances. They just did these performances. So art was they were trying to decommodify art. And then you have Jeff Koons, right? And what's his face? Damien Hirst, born of that conceptual. Or Andy Warhol was really a person who was like saying to you, you want something that you can sell? I'll give you something. So here's a Brillo box, sell that. You know, these are acts of rebellion. These aren't like, you know, a lot of people think that these are just, you know, artists being, you know, manipulative and learning how to become rich people. They had no hope of being rich. They had no hope of any fame at all. They were just thinkers, and they were thinking this out. And Warhol said, I'm a realist. I am a realist. What is the world that I'm looking at right now? What does it look like? And he went and he would sit with cufflinks that had microphones in them and have some lunch. And what did you have for lunch? Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, I love that. You know, and just let a person hang themselves. He would let people hang themselves because he realized that we are living in a ridiculously stupid and shallow world. Not because he thought we are shallow, not because we will always be shallow, not because art is shallow, no. He did it because this is what society was becoming. And he wanted to represent it like a realist. And he is the ultimate realist, you know? So when the conceptualists did it, there's no hope that they were going to become famous but they were actually thinkers acting in the art world, you know, thinking of narrativity, the narrativity thing that I think about, and say, what can I do to actually address this? Or what can I do that will actually, you know, bring all of this into focus, right? That is what we do as art. We're not painting nice little pretty things to bring in focus. You know what I mean? We're making something that is going to bring these massive ideas into focus, and we're going to focus on the most crucial aspects of our times, the most urgent aspects of our times, you know? And that's what these guys did. They're heroic still. You know, they're heroic. But when you look at Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst, these sort of next generation of it, they're selling that stuff like hotcakes. Stuff that was originally supposed to be the decommodification of art is now the ultra-commodification of art. You know, it's so easy to flip that. That thing is a flip like that. How we can capitalize. There are always scores of people out there, thousands of people out there, whose whole purpose in life is how are we going to capitalize on this? How are we going to make money from this? How are we going to make money from this? And they're all over the world, in all walks of life. And that's what they're taught in school. We're all taught in school. You want to be saying, ride the train. Are you an artist? You have an artist. Well, you're a successful artist. Well, you know, I did some really good painting today. I think I'm saying, do you make money? No, I don't make any money. We'll forget about it. And I was talking about how much money you make. I mean, that's all anyone cares about. So as artists, we're just like sheep. We're just walking around like sheep. And anyone who can corral us into, you know, will be able to make money from it. The Medici. I mean, no, we're all cultures are to blame. That's just the human tendency to want to make money. It's not a bad tendency to want to make money. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, if there weren't people who had money, art wouldn't be able to exist, right? You need that. In fact, the golden axis happened in the 300 AD or BC when all of a sudden the trade routes came together and art started blossoming. You know, we need it, but we do not need to be ruled by it or ruled by its methods, right? We have to be respected for what we are, not commandeered and co-opted, which is what we have become. All right? Now let's go back to this. I think it's fine. Do you have a palette and some white paint with some paints?
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.